Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for making it in from the rain. Lovely to see you all. So welcome to this distinguished speaker event with our friend and esteemed colleague, Sir Ronnie Cohen. I'm Alex Nicholls, Professor of Social Entrepreneurship here at the Side Business School. And when we founded the Skoll Centre, which I brought here in 2004, we decided the first thing we needed to do was define what it was. So we spent quite a long time trying to work out what it was and realized that that was not what social entrepreneurs actually wanted. We would go and talk to them in the field and say, what can we do that's most useful for you? And they said, unsurprisingly, can we have some more resource? So early on in our work at the Skoll Centre, we decided we needed to focus on finance. Now, we're talking 2005, 6, 7 at this point, when it wasn't called impact investing, it was called social finance. And Ronnie was instrumental in some of the early initiatives in that. We'll come to him in a moment. So we decided to work on this. So the first thing we did was a book on social finance in 2015. And then we developed programming and courses in the subject here. And we're very happy to have our impact investing class here with us today that fell out of that original work. So you're very welcome. We really determined that in a business school, it was really important to have impact. And if you look at the logo and the rationale and the way we present the business school now, its impact is there, impact from within. And so the role of the Skoll Centre and impact investing and social finance within that is significant and important to us. And it's been a privilege for me to work in that area for so long. So in this context, I'm delighted to welcome Sir Ronnie Cohen, Ronnie, if we may, who's a good friend of ours and whom I've known for more than a decade, probably when he was doing his work in the G8 Social Investment Task Force. We came across each other then. And it's fair to say that without him, there wouldn't be a field. He's too modest to suggest that, but his work and his influence on key pillars within the field is enormous. And if you would ask yourself, what would the field be without Ronnie? Well, it wouldn't be a field. So he's a renowned philanthropist, venture capitalist, private equity investor, social innovator, and often recognized, as I said, as the father, or possibly godfather, in the nicest possible sense, of impact investing in the United Kingdom. Sorry, Ronnie. And more importantly, more recently, he's the founder and president of the GSG Impact, chair of the Education Outcomes Fund, which some of us were just talking about in class just recently, about some announcements in Africa around that fund. And he's instrumental in founding and chairing the International Foundation for Valuing Impact, which developed the impact-weighted accounts model, among other things, with colleagues at Harvard. Also Bridges Ventures, Michelle Giddens was just on a call with us. Social finance, too, in the UK. So he's incredibly important in this field. Some of you will know his book. I have the book, because the kind of sycophant I am. I have the book. You can sign it for me later, Ronnie. Thank you. It's new in the sense that it's been updated. So it was a powerful book when it first came out. It's been updated to, I think, reflect the world we're in somewhat today, and therefore is strongly recommended to you. And it's an inspiring roadmap, I think, to an impact economy that helps us cope with the terrible things we have to think about in the modern world. And Ronnie will speak to that. So Ronnie will talk, and then we'll have a Q&A. We'll have microphones around the room, so we would love your questions. And thank you for coming. And Ronnie, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for hosting me today and my colleagues. Rebecca was involved in the G8 Social Impact Investment Task Force, to which you referred. And I want to recognize your contribution to the field, the creation of the Skoll Centre and the World Forum in 2004. Was really way ahead of this becoming a field. And I want to recognize Jeff Skoll, who is a very dear friend of mine who has contributed over the years, right up until now, in contributing to the International Foundation for Valuing Impact. It's fair to say there wouldn't be a field without both of you. And it's a great pleasure to be here at the Syed Business School. I studied at Oxford. I went to Exeter College. I've forgotten how cold and damp Oxford is. But it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you to talk about what's happened in the field of impact, in particular over the last 10 years, since the G8 task force published its seminal report. It published a number of other reports on the subject at exactly the same time, I think 8 reports in all, but its seminal report was entitled The Invisible Heart of Markets, Impact, the Invisible Heart of Markets. And at that time, impact wasn't really a word that was in wide use. And the idea that somehow we would be able to align economic incentives with social and environmental ones was really only very high in the ether. But when we began to analyze what was happening in each of the G7 countries plus Australia, we realized that what the social impact bond had invented only 5 years before, in 2010, was actually happening already across the world. Each of the countries wrote a report which you can access on the web, and it analyzed what was happening in the field that we would call today impact investment, but more broadly in the field of dealing with social issues in particular. And what came back was that everywhere there was interest in trying to bring financial markets to tackle social issues. In the words of that report, to shift our economic system from risk-return to risk-return and impact. In those days, ESG investing was only about 13 trillion. It reached 30 trillion in less than a decade. And then it got blowback from the Trump administration, from the oil lobby, and from investors who were disappointed to discover that there was no real evidence about the impact that was actually being delivered. And today, I think we can look back 100 years or so to what happened after the crash of 1929, when investors realized that they had been investing in companies without understanding what profits the companies were making. Because at that time, it's hard to believe today, each company could pick its own accounting policies. It could put into secret reserves a share of its profit without telling shareholders. And there were no auditors to verify the numbers. Now today, that sounds crazy. But then, there were huge discussions in Congress that if you introduced a single set of accounting principles for every company, irrespective of size or sector, it would be the end of American capitalism. And this was a real debate. And Roosevelt forced it through, created GAAP accounting principles, or at least the movement that led to that, created the SEC, imposed the use of editors. And today, 10 years after the report, which had not only a section in it, but a separate report on measuring impact and impact accounting. We are at a watershed. We have actually now invented impact accounting. We can show how it's going to work. You need to have values for different environmental and social impacts. A year ago, during Climate Week, the International Foundation for Valuing Impacts, which I've been privileged to chair, which has now merged with the Capitalism Coalition, published 100,000 value factors for environmental impacts in nearly 300 locations across the world. They covered not only emissions of every kind, but water usage, water consumption, soil erosion, waste. And we didn't publish, although we referred to, social impact being measured in a similar way. The economic impact of excluding a gender group or an ethnic group from the workforce. You could measure that. You could compare the employment within a company with the community it was based in. You could arrive at a figure for the diversity debit of Amazon, 6.5 billion, and Apple, 2.5 billion. And if you related it to the wage bill, you could see that Apple had a 25% of its wages debit, and Amazon only 16%. You began to get different insights about both environmental and social impact. Now, none of this, we were talking about it earlier, none of this would have been possible without AI and machine learning. The idea of measuring impact was there. It was there in the background, always. But no one had actually been able to measure it. With AI, we began to be able to crunch numbers of such speed and such quantity that we could actually come out with these value factors. And my hope is that later this year, we will find on the screens of the big data providers impacts in monetary terms. Environmental impacts at first, social impacts later. The significance of this is going to be huge. And there is another parallel about measurement, which actually opened the door to my career. This issue of measurement is never visible. When I was 26 and at another business school, at Harvard Business School, in the 60s, venture capital was just appearing. People thought, as they did with impact, oh, it'll never work. How can you invest in a 10-year fund with no running yield, no return for 10 years potentially, the possibility of total loss, and hope to make a multiple of your money backing young people who didn't have much work experience, right? People at the business school sitting around me thought there's no way anyone is going to overtake IBM. It'll never happen. Well, we know. Microsoft, Apple, etc. And at that time, investors wouldn't invest because of the case I've just made against it. But some investors, one in particular, the head of the AT&T pension fund, decided to invest seriously and backed a lot of the first venture funds, including my own at Apex. And when people asked Tom Judge, why are you investing in venture capital? Can you prove it's going to work? He would answer, I can't prove it, but I have faith. Okay? Today, venture capital is $3.5 trillion across the world. Private equity, its cousin, is over $7 trillion. The first Apex fund I raised in Europe in 1981 was the biggest in Europe, £10 million. The latest Apex fund, $13 billion. Okay? Investors shifted. They shifted from investing in the stocks and the bonds of their own country to including venture capital. But I didn't realize why. The reason was that 15 years earlier, at Chicago University, Professor Markowitz and his colleagues began to measure risk. Up until then, like impact today, risk was in the background. When Christopher Columbus set off on his voyage and raised money, the people putting up the money realized there's a risk he's not going to come back, right? And so risk was there. But until this group at the University of Chicago decided to measure risk, no one had done it. How did they do it? Very simple. They looked back at how much a stock or a share went up and down. If it went up and down like this, then it was risky. If it went up and down like that, then it wasn't. And if it was, it was flat, it was riskless. I hadn't appreciated then that this concept of risk measurement would change the investment world. How did it change it? It brought new thinking. It brought the concept of risk-adjusted return. If venture capital is very risky, but can deliver a much higher return than any other investment, why wouldn't you invest in it? You'd be better off. It also brought another very important concept, the concept of diversification. If you're going to include venture capital, how much of it are you going to include? This opened the door to venture capital and the tech revolution, and to investment in emerging markets, and therefore globalization. It had massive effect. Today, we're in the same position with regard to impact. Investors have been investing without knowing, investing $30 trillion of ESG, without knowing what impact they've been creating. Therefore, we needed a form of measurement that they could use. That form of measurement needed to be easy to understand and needed to be comparable with profits and sales, which are the basic language of investment and of business. And so the idea of impact-weighted accounts started about 8-10 years ago, when we began to say, if we can measure impact in the way that we can measure profit, then things will change. The habits of investors will change, just as they did when we started to measure risk. They will look for businesses that can optimize, create the best balance between risk, return, and impact. Why? Well, first of all, because consumers have changed. Younger consumers are desperately interested in how much good or harm a supplier of products that they're purchasing is creating. They don't want to invest in companies using child labor, or to purchase their products, or to buy gas guzzlers, which are polluting the atmosphere. All of us have, I'm sure, a very controversial view about Elon Musk. But Tesla was the first company that brought environmental into its product. It enabled it to grow to be $1 trillion company and to change the whole of the automobile industry. We're getting a lot of pushback now from the oil companies and Trump administration and so on and so forth. But that is the model for the big successes of the future. The new Microsofts and Apples are going to be optimizing risk, return, and impact. And they're going to be doing that in a much more sophisticated way because investors will have access to their impacts in monetary terms. Now, if I say to you, Exxon creates $39 billion of environmental damage a year from operations, and Shell, 22 billion, and BP, 13. What's your reaction? Your first reaction is probably to say, I'd rather buy BP. I don't want to be buying a company that's polluting more. But if you think about it, the second reaction would be, wow, governments are going to have to tax Exxon and Shell and BP through carbon taxes. And when they do that, it's going to affect the after-tax profits of those companies. And so their value will fall. So as an investor, even if I'm not interested in the environment, I better be careful. I better invest in those that will have a lower tax bill. Similarly, if you are looking at an investment in a car company that is producing only combustion engine cars, or one that is producing electric vehicles, where will you go? You will go, and that's what's been happening, to the one that is going to be carrying the inferior regulatory risk of taxation, and taking advantage of the changing preferences of consumers. So what impact measurement enables us to do, what impact accounting now enables us to do even better, is to align economic incentives with social and environmental ones, right? That's what impact is all about. If doing good and doing well means a better economic return, then our whole economies are going to shift to doing that. And in my book, I now have a new chapter on democracy and capitalism, but we can come back to that in question time if you like. But in my book, I point out that this issue of impact doesn't just affect investors. Investors invest in businesses. It affects them. Businesses are dependent on consumers. They affect everyone. Governments have a big role to play in incentivizing or de-incentivizing the purchases of certain goods, or through taxation, the profits that companies make, and philanthropists, who are really, in theory, the most important impact investors, because that's their raison d'etre. They too are being affected by impact, because up until now, they've given money away without measuring the impact they deliver. They are accountable Not to shareholders, they don't have any. But to the beneficiaries, they help. But if they don't measure the impact, then how do they know how well they performed, how much the beneficiaries benefited? And so you can see that impact actually pervades the whole of our economic system. And my belief is that we are now well into the transition to impact economies, where every investment decision and every business decision and many consumer decisions are made on the basis of not just financial return, but impact as well. Why will this happen? Out of necessity. There's no other way of tackling our environmental problems than to get the whole of our economies to stop aggravating environmental problems and start generating solutions. Similarly, as you read in my book, if you look at how democracies are being destabilized now, and you analyze why, you come to the conclusion that our system, our economic system, has created such imbalance between rich and poor as a result of the tech revolution that half the population at least fears that democracy doesn't work, that elites are taking all the spoils. And that opens the way for populist leaders to come along and say, forget about democracy, I will look after your interests. Give me a free rein and I'll take care of you. It's not sustainable to have such massive inequities. They were so great in 1929, at the time of the crash, that they led to a similar, and we know what followed, similar unrest with huge levels of unemployment and all the rest of it aggravating it. After the war, we saw a trend the other way. The creation of the welfare state, progressive taxation. From 45 to 70, we saw a huge reduction in social and economic gaps. And then with the tech revolution, they have grown to huge extent. The average multiple of a CEO salary to an average employee salary 40 years ago was 40. 40 times. A CEO made 40 times the average employee salary. Do you know what the number is today? 347 times. 347 times. And so our economic system needs to create fairer outcomes for the people it employs and the communities it serves. That's why I believe, and you read it in the book, Alex, that we need impact as the invisible heart of markets to guide Adam Smith's famous invisible hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronnie. Inspiring as ever. So we'll come to the crowd in a moment, but we have many nationalities and countries here in our group, and I know you're a great infrastructure builder, and part of that has been the GSG and the local NABs and GSG Impact country-based initiatives. How do you see this grand, impact economy playing out in local markets and local countries? Are you seeing very different kind of patterns?
So the GSG was a child of the G8 task force. When we reported in 2014, the British government wrote to me to ask whether we would continue this effort beyond the G8. We're now in 48 countries. Global Steering Group for Impact Investment has become GSG Impact, as our emphasis has broadened beyond investment to include impact economies. And most of these countries are in the developing world, in Africa, Asia, and elsewhere. I say most of them, but certainly half of them, I would imagine, are in those parts of the world. The notion of impact investment applies everywhere. To the extent that you can begin to attract investment in smaller companies in Africa where there's a lack of equity and create jobs, that would qualify as impact investment. But also, governments there are cash-strapped. They don't have money for education, which is the biggest engine of social mobility. We're sitting in an educational establishment. None of us would be here without the education we've been privileged to receive, right? Not a single one of us. And yet, governments don't invest in it because they don't have the money. And education attracts 10% of the amount of money flowing into health. So when you ask yourself the question, well, how do we get countries in Africa and in Asia to access the funds necessary to invest in education if the government can't provide it and foreign donors don't provide it? You come to impact investment. You say, if I could take the government of Ghana or Sierra Leone to commit to pay for outcomes in education when they have been achieved, not up front, when they have been achieved. We will pay you so much for a girl that achieves an attainment level in reading and writing or beyond that. If the person is disabled, we will pay you more. If it's somebody from a rural area rather than a city, we will pay you more. You have a price list, if you like, and you sign a contract. And you're signing a contract with an organization, usually a non-profit, sometimes a business, like a non-profit like CAMFED in Africa. Some of you may know CAMFED. And CAMFED says, look, I've helped people improve their attainment levels. I am happy to sign a contract that I will hit these targets. And on the basis of the price list, I can go to investors like the Bridges Impact Fund, Bridges UBS Impact Fund, and say, look, fund me like a normal business, although I'm a charitable enterprise. I will hit these numbers, and I will pay you back with an interest rate that will rise according to my success, like the original Peterborough bond you referred to. Yes. So I think impact investment today is a way for governments in emerging countries to attract private capital to achieve their social agendas. And because they only pay, they're paying 15% of the amount, but because they only pay when the education has been completed. Now, in primary education, that isn't going to bring you an immediate revenue. But if it's somebody graduating from high school getting into work, they'll be paying at the time when an educated person is getting into employment and beginning to pay taxes on it. Yeah. So I think what we're seeing now in Africa, for example, is half a dozen countries in South Africa, in Kenya, in Zambia, in Rwanda, Tunisia, in North Africa, where governments are becoming aware of this. And the reason they've become aware of it, Alex, is that financial markets have taken this concept of pay for outcomes to $1 trillion of sustainability-linked bonds and loans, where a company or a government, more often a company, borrows with a target. It could be an electricity company, and its target is to reduce emissions. There are targets in its bond document, and if it achieves these reductions in emissions, it pays less interest, right? This has made governments aware of the fact that this is no longer some small, marginal, experimental financial instrument, that you can now access very significant amounts of money. And 3 governments, at least, in the world, Chile, Uruguay, and I think Brazil, have raised sustainability-linked impact bonds. So here in the UK, the government is beginning to take this issue seriously. It has no money, as you know, to spend on social issues. It has a huge social ambition, which it, won the election on. And so they've set up a £500 million outcomes fund to be matched by another 500 million, mainly from local authorities. That's the aim, so £1 billion, to pay for improved outcomes for children. And our estimation is that on the basis of 100 outcomes partnerships, so the social impact bond is a partnership with a delivery organization and an outcomes payer, about 100 outcomes partnerships in the UK. The evidence is it costs half as much as paying for the activities up front. Half as much. And you have this advantage of not having to raise the money now and paying when hopefully you've generated some revenues. So I'm hopeful that the example of the UK will be copied in these African countries. And we have found philanthropic organizations like the Lego Foundation and others that are prepared to supplement FCDO in the UK, the Foreign Office, prepared to supplement the amounts of money that the local government is able to pay. So I think impact, we've just talked of the social area, the same applies to the environmental area. If in South Africa you want to close the coal mines and you're going to have 100,000 miners unemployed, you're going to have to upskill them to work on roads, electricity networks, telecoms networks, sewage, water, or whatever else. That can be done through impact, outcomes partnerships on the one hand, outcomes investment funds on the other.
Yeah, thank you. We talked about this morning. It's really interesting, and we'll come to this on Thursday in the class we're doing then, about how the UK was such a pathfinder. I mean, frankly, because of you, really, in lots of initiatives which were taken around the world, and we hope this new government will begin to do that again, I hope. Can we take some questions from the audience, please? Please put your hand up if you'd like a question. We have mics coming around. Can you tell us who you are, where you're from, and ask a question, please, once the mic is with you? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Julio Alejandro from Mexico. And my question is about when you mentioned destabilization and disincentivizing from a government in favor of certain technologies or industry or against. In the current state in the United States, Donald Trump has gone against the ESG principles, and now it could be more profitable to invest in those contamination-polluting industries because the government is propping from it. And what you're referring is that we just have to be kind of like passive victims towards whatever a government, a country, a system decides to democratically or not elect anyone. And also, whereas your example is doable within most Western countries that support democracy, how can non-democratic countries in the Middle East, in Africa, would have any incentives of aligning or determining anything that you mentioned when there's no incentive for them to do anything rather than for them staying in power forever?
So we mustn't confuse the political cycle and the trend. I find very few big investors or businesses saying, climate is gone. There's no climate issue, right? I find them saying, climate's going to keep getting worse. We're going to have to play catch up. We're going to have to introduce taxation, incentives to emissions, put more money into government efforts to improve the national performance. So, of course, it's very real what you're referring to. We're all feeling the headwinds, but the trend is to greater impact, greater tackling of environmental issues, greater tackling of social issues. And interestingly, if you think about it, impact investment is about resilience and risk management. What do I mean by that? If a company today does not anticipate that there are going to be natural disasters that will affect its supply chain, it's going to get into trouble, right? Insurance companies don't deny climate change. They're paying out more and more, and they're increasing premium more and more, and companies are finding it impossible to insure certain risks. So in many ways, if we present our ideas from a business point of view, rather than a social point of view, that this is the way companies should manage themselves to maximize their ability to deliver profits in the future, there is a chance that some of the things that we are doing will actually get government support.
I think it's fair to say government does matter, doesn't it? Whatever we think of government, it matters in the way it has levers to pull that very few other institutions can. So I think we always have to bear that in mind. But your point on failed states is a good one. Another question, please. Over here, yes, please. Over here first. Have you got a microphone? And then to here. Oh, here, sorry. Thank you.
Hi, Sir Ronald. Thank you for everything you've shared with us. I think it's very important. And my question is regarding, you mentioned that impact measurement and impact accounting can help align economic outcomes with social and environmental goals. But in practice, I think we still lack of a common framework that brings coherence and comparability to the field. Now, with AI, my question is, do you think there's a way to solve this fragmentation, or there's something still missing more fundamental on a system level?
So I think if we can get the data providers to converge on a set of value factors, which people in which everything should be open source, capable of being improved, and all the rest of it, that would be a major step forward. Today, we have multiple organizations that have tried to develop their own value factors. But we've reached a stage now where we need to standardize. And the reason, one of the reasons the International Foundation for Valuing Impact merged with the Capitals Coalition is that the Capitals Coalition has come to appreciate that whereas up until then it had been a convening center for all the different approaches to impact measurement and valuation, now with the IFVI standards, we should all be converging on that. So I actually think the data providers are crucial to establishing the benchmark, even more important than governments. governments tend to be, as we know, followers rather than leaders. Investors, in this case, need the tools to be able to make investment decisions that take impacts into account. And as we were saying earlier, I was saying earlier, this will change the behavior of companies. So the theory of change is if we can get impact accounting into the hands of investors today, they will make investment decisions that will shift our economic system in the direction of impact economies. And they will do it because the returns will be better because of taxation, regulation risk, and the preferences of consumers. Now, AI is hugely important in providing a tool that enables investors to assimilate this information, which, you know, if you have 100,000 different value factors and every company has facilities everywhere in the world, that information needs to be analyzed for investors. They can't do it themselves.
But to that point, Ronnie, do you see, sorry, just 1 minute, do you see that happening? Are people, entrepreneurs, devising AI-driven impact measurement data set generate? Is that happening outside?
Yeah, sure. You have some in the audience here. You have two entrepreneurial firms, GIST and Richmond Global Services, that are doing exactly that.
Right.
And you know, when there's a new paradigm that's created, it creates huge entrepreneurial opportunities. Yes. In my generation, companies that didn't believe in technology were wiped out. I mean, even IBM that believed in technology but didn't believe in, you know, the threat from Microsoft and Apple was overtaken as a fraction of the size of these companies today. The same is going to happen with impact. A business today, somebody who owns coal mines, who just sits on the coal mines forever, is going to find an asset decrease like that and eventually be forbidden from, you know, from bringing it out of the ground. So I think impact, the measurement of impact, like the measurement of risk, is actually going to have systemic effect.
Makes sense. Over here, sorry, several. Oh, now we suddenly have loads. Let's go to the back. I can't always see. Who is towards the back there? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Helen Brooks. I'm originally from Kenya, and I love the trend towards sustainability and fairness. Yeah, but we are, in my country, increasingly worried about investments that are, you know, mitigate the environmental impact heavily by using carbon credits. Yeah. Because the problem is that we see firsthand how communities are locked out of indigenous resources that are ring-fenced for, you know, the purchase of credits to entities they, you know, do not even understand. And this is driving them further into poverty, and there's a lot of personal pain around this. Yeah. I don't know what you have to say about that, perhaps?
Yeah, so, I mean, the carbon credit market and carbon offsets generally, I view as a sort of transitional phenomenon in helping investors and companies to accept that you can't just flick a switch and get to zero emissions.
1451.
Sorry. Zero emissions, that it's going to take time and investment to get to that. Having said that, they're very inefficient markets. The IFVI price for a ton of carbon is $236. The price in the offset market is between $5 and $30. So it's reflecting the supply and demand for offsets or carbon credits rather than the actual damage that needs to be repaired. Now, there are unintended consequences that arise from everything, and some people are trying to game, every market. But I don't. I mean, transitional could take a decade or two. I'm
Can we
sort
take
of
another
weighing.
question? Sorry, yes, because thank you. A couple more questions because we haven't got that much time. Over here, please. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Frank. I'm Kenyan living in South Africa. My question is, the recent aid cuts, are they going to stimulate impact investing in Africa or slow it down?
The recent?
The aid cuts in
the
aid.
aid cut.
Yes, like USAID.
It's a good question. It should stimulate impact investment, shouldn't it? If there's less money around, then you try to attract investment. I think I would expect that. I would expect that to be the reaction. My view today is it's easier to raise the investment than philanthropic money or aid money. But you do need to have the outcomes payer in place. And so if you can, between the two of you, convince the Kenyan government, look, set up an outcomes fund to tackle issues in health or education or upskilling or whatever they see as a priority, that would be a very good thing to do.
And you're a very entrepreneurial individual, so I'm sure you can lead on that, yes. A couple more, yes, lady at the back there. Sorry, not the back, to me. Pass it back, please. In the glass, yes. You okay?
No.
Thank you.
So you use the word risk a lot and risk quantification. I'm a medical statistician. I work up the hill in Headington, and I think you and I probably talk different risk. So I'm curious, the interdisciplinary field of risk quantification, like how do you see that coming forward? So the example would be, I think we all got it during the pandemic that health and risk impact every type of risk quantification. But like I'm a little bit older than 10 years, and I promise you, it's been in our field for a little bit more than that. Like, how do we marry the two? Because I think there's a lot of good risk examples and risk from a person-centric up to population level, but we're not doing it right now.
It's interesting because at the personal level, I had a brush with cancer some years ago, and I had treatment, and I gave my book to one of the doctors who was treating me. And he came back saying, you know what, we don't think of risk enough. He's a surgeon, risk enough in health. And he has now prepared a whole framework about risk and impact on the patient. And it's a framework for thinking about how you treat a patient, what level of risk and what's the benefit, and sort of a formal network. When it comes to the national health system, it seems very odd to me when we have almost 100% predictability of the growth of chronic disease, whether it's cardiac or cancer or diabetes, that governments don't get into prevention. So you know the risk is extremely high, you can predict the level of risk, and you do nothing about prevention. Now, there have been diabetes impact bonds, which have shown that you can, through a changed diet and changed level of exercise and other things, improving the discipline of patients, you can reduce the likelihood of pre-diabetics becoming diabetics. And I think one of the big strengths of impact thinking is this emphasis on prevention. So you too, if you have influence on a government, getting them to think of prevention and to use private capital to invest in prevention has to be the way forward. Prevention costs 10% of treatment, or less.
Can I take Chairman's privilege and just ask one final question, because we're only at time, everybody, so I apologise. Some of you will see Sir Ronald in a moment anyway. So one of the reasons for coming together was to reflect on 10 years, not since we last spoke, but since we last did a conversation like this.
Yeah.
And it's a pleasure to do it again. Can you give us maybe 2 or 3 predictions for the next 10 years? And I know they will not be recorded and taken against you, but I mean, you're an optimist, so I imagine it'll all be positive, but...
Yeah, I'm an optimist and I'm determined.
Yes.
So,
2 good factors, yes.
I think within the next decade, every company will be publishing an impact statement, and it will be reviewed by analysts and by the board of directors together with the financial statements. I think we are going to see a crop of impact ventures. I don't like to use Tesla as an example because of the other things that Elon Musk is involved in doing, but we're going to see Tesla-like models in education, in health, in food, in every area. We're going to find entrepreneurs who say there has to be a healthier product, better for the planet, and I'm going to be the one to deliver it. I think we're going to see AI meeting impact. Education. We never had in human history an era where you can teach 1 million people across the world a customized lesson simultaneously. Think of the potential there.
Yeah.
And in health, diagnosis of illnesses in remote places. So my prediction is that where technology meets impact are going to be the big profit opportunities.
Well, thank you. So it's been a pleasure, as usual, Ronnie. Thank you. I mean, I think the idea of being stubborn, relentless, and hopeful is something we should all take away, particularly those of you who work on the ground and this stuff, and life is hard and difficult, but they're good qualities to have. So can we thank Ronnie for his time very much?
Thank you.